This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one, the only, Cam Lau. Today is April 7th, 2025, and I am going to be joined by one of my favorite guests, Ken Good. He's a repeat guest. We've had him on before. He is a attorney with the Professional Bail Bondsmen of Texas, and we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform. Well, thanks for joining me again. It's been maybe about a year since I last had you on. We got to talk about, I learned quite a bit from you about the whole bail bond process and what's been going on there. And I guess we're having you on again to kind of talk more about the tough on crime policies that we're starting to see a resurgence of, especially with the new Trump administration.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're learning with what did we learn with immigration? We were told that with the current law, they couldn't enforce the border, they couldn't close the border. And I think Trump said it best recently. We didn't need a new statute. We needed a new president. I think we needed. I mean, I don't even think it's that on crime. We just go back to what we know works.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really
What?
what they're doing on the border is they're going back to enforcing the law. If we do that on crime, we'll have the same result.
Why do you think there's been such a disconnect between public perception of crime and the actual crime rate?
Uh, oh, um, I have actually debated this law firm that's been filing these lawsuits nationally, and they've been using that same argument. It's a perception versus reality issue. And, we have these pseudo studies that are being released and it's orchestrated by these groups that are being funded by Soros and his kind. And that's the whole argument. It's just a perception issue. It's not really that crime is increasing. And they always conclude you can look at the FBI statistics. The problem is, in October, the FBI statistics were updated and they now show crime was increasing. And that it just blew out their whole argument. And, I had published an article about 10 days before that saying, here's all the reasons why you should question the accuracy of the FBI statistics. And so it was just really coincidental that I had just published an article or had an article published on that very issue. And then their whole argument went away. But the problem is, like, within a week, one of these groups that does these fake studies issued a new quote unquote surprise thing that said, well, increasing crime is not being caused by criminal justice reform or bail reform. And that creates this whole problem in the public is who do you believe? Because you've got all this stuff saying, oh, no, crime's not increasing. Don't believe your eyes, what you're seeing. Believe us. And and their conclusions were all based on these FBI statistics that are now been updated and they weren't accurate. And they knew they weren't accurate when they were saying all that. So it's really hard to find a compromise with these people when that's what they're doing. I mean, they're, I believe, intentionally misleading and misrepresenting the public to get to a policy result that they want, not based upon what's best for public safety.
So the FBI essentially lied about crime in the United States?
You don't have to say that the FBI lied. I mean, I wrote an article in the Attorney at Law magazine that was published in October that questioned why we should question the accuracy of the FBI statistics. And the number one reason why you should question them is for the last 4 or 5 years, they've been changing the way they collect this data. And as a result of the changes, law enforcement agencies had to buy new equipment to report the data. And so right at the outset, the two largest law enforcement agencies in the United States, I think New York and LA, didn't have the new equipment. And so they weren't reporting it. And also, what the FBI was releasing was contrary to other statistics that are released annually. I mean, the CDC releases annual data on murders that was completely different and contrary to what the FBI statistics showed. I mean, they were showing an increase. And then I think Trump during the campaign was even pointing to some surveys that are done annually, been doing it for a long time, and they were drastically different than the FBI statistics. And so I think that it's a combination of things, but the changeover law enforcement agencies not reporting it. I mean, you could even argue that the update, which was a month before the election, was the result of more law enforcement agencies coming on board with the new equipment, and then their data, their statistics being reported, and then the update showed that crime was increasing. And you would then say, well, it's still not accurate because it's still incomplete. I mean, but you could also give them an evil intent because I don't believe in coincidences. So the update was found a month before the election, and I think they would rather have the update come out before the election than after Trump was elected. So, I mean, that was the first time that I thought I think Trump's going to win. That alone was the basis of my conclusion.
So they claim that they didn't have all of the statistics when they initially released the report. Is what you're saying?
Well, they haven't really addressed why the new additional data was included, and I mean they didn't do a press release. It was just discovered a month before the election that in a couple of weeks before that they had been updated, and that's why I think you could argue that it was being done as new people got equipment and it was just being automatically done, and so they didn't realize it. I mean, but I just don't believe in coincidences, and I think a month before the election, you could argue that they were holding back, waiting for the election, but when they saw that Trump was probably going to win, they probably went ahead and allowed it to update so that they couldn't be accused of hiding this data before the election. But I was told a long time ago, don't attribute an evil intent when incompetence is enough on its own. And I think that incompetence explains what happened, or there are reasons that explain it that don't require an evil intent. I just think that the a month before the election also is enough to rely upon an evil intent too.
Well, whether it's evil or incompetent, those people really have no place in the FBI or law enforcement altogether. So hopefully Trump can do what he can to fix that.
Well, but the thing is, we had data scientists for the last year or two saying that this information was not complete, and so people should not be relying upon it. So the people that look at this data was already saying that. But who was saying, "Oh, you can rely upon it"? The Democrats, because it supported their conclusion, it supported their policy that they were implementing. And so I would argue that the real evil intent was we had one partisan group in the political divide, relying upon it, knowing all this other stuff. And the problem is their friends in the press were just spitting it back. I mean, well, how can you say crime is increasing? Look at the FBI statistics. And they went dead silent. If you want to look, at the timeline of the election, when that came out, they quit talking about crime. I mean, they immediately just went whole hog into Trump is a fascist, Trump is Hitler. I mean, and that's all we heard about for the next 10 days. That was not an accident. That was to cover up or to try to drown out the information on the FBI statistics. And it didn't work because that was a big story when that came out.
Yeah, the media has just been, I think they have been blatantly evil for decades now, trying to falsify the public's attitude towards crime and just policing and all of that.
Well, I think there's a bigger story there, and I'd like for someone to try to cover that because we really don't have this. I mean, we see these videos all the time where every major news group is spitting the same language. It's like they've all received the same talking points, um, the same directions on how to cover a story. And I think part of it is, we have these listservs, Google groups where they're all receiving stuff. And it may just, if you want to give somebody a non-evil intent as news organizations are crunching for, they have less and less money to spend on the news. They're relying more and more on the national parties. And I think the Democrats are really good at releasing these press releases and everybody falls in line and jumps on it. But I don't think that's enough to explain it because you and I, we're normal people. We would look at something and go, this is just uh, not correct, but we don't ever receive any of that. I mean, we don't hear that from the press. They just jump in line. So there's a bigger story there, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of that. But I do think we will in the next 4 years.
Have some of the statistics been skewed by like reclassifying different crimes from like felonies to misdemeanors?
Yes, or even decriminalizing a lot of stuff. Look at California, and I think someone needs to look at Boston because in the last week we've had the Boston mayor before Congress testifying about, she's a sanctuary city, but she's one of the safest cities, and I think that if somebody would spend the time and look at her data, because I think you would find that they're reclassifying a lot of crimes either from felonies to misdemeanor, or they're no longer prosecuting a lot of crimes. And probably the best place to start would be look at carjacking statistics because that data is probably the most accurate nationwide still, because insurance companies won't pay off a claim for a carjacking or a car being stolen without a police report. So if someone tells me crime's going down, the first thing I want to look at is carjacking or you know police reports on cars being stolen, and I think that that's where you should start. And then look at California with Proposition 49, where they reclassified some felonies to misdemeanors with the argument, well, they'll still have to answer for their crimes. And then that's the whole basis of the urban city said we're not, well, since it's now a misdemeanor for theft under $950, we're no longer going to prosecute it. We've seen the impact of that. Stores can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. They close. Crime starts going up. I mean, career criminals figure out ways to make millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars abusing these policies because it's no longer a crime. And then we have, as a result, Gascon, who's really the poster boy for these policies, was defeated by 20 something points in November, and Prop 34 or 32 passed in California to roll back a large parts of Proposition 49. The problem that we're still having in California and in other places is the Democrats are now wanting to appear to be moderate, but it's just like the Biden thing. He ran on being a moderate, but as soon as he was elected, he ran the country, or he allowed the people to run the country around him to lead it from the far left. And I look at you can see Newsom trying to do that. He's already started a podcast. His first guest was a conservative, and he's trying to make it sound like he understands. It's like Clinton all over again. I feel your pain. But it's not. I mean, he has no intention of feeling your pain. If you are stupid enough to vote for him, you're going to get Biden too. And the problem is, we've already been fooled by this once. So why would we ever be
Mhm.
fooled again? And so I would say, instead of looking at Newsom's words, look at his actions for the whole time he's been in office. And the contradiction between those two is drastic. And this is the ultimate thing he says is, well, this is outside of my control. I would have done something different. Okay, that's the first thing he's you can't believe anything he says. And he's slick, he looks good, and so he probably, I mean, if you were going to vote today or predict today, you would say he's going to be the nominee because he can't run for governor again. He's term limited out. So he has no other option but to run for president. He probably has a lot of money in his PAC or whatever in his campaign fund. So he has a substantial amount of money to be able to run already. So you expect him to be the one to run. But I mean, the way their party is reacting to the election, they're not moderating. They're going full hilt. If we'd have just been more liberal, we would have won. So I don't think, I mean, that doesn't win. So they're going to have to
Mhm.
put up someone that the far left thinks will do what they want, and they'll allow them to moderate. And you can already see that that's what Newsom's trying to do. I don't think it'll work again for a while.
Well, and despite all of the best efforts of the Democrats and the media, public sentiment is really shifting. I mean, not just Trump's election, but we've seen a lot of states take legislative measures to change their attitude towards crime and safety.
Well, this isn't a right versus left issue. I mean, historically, both parties have been law and order parties. Throughout our history, there's been long periods of time where that's a prerequisite for you to be able to run for office. I would say we've had a cycle before where we've had this exact same problem and we're kind of repeating it. It's from the 60s where we were feeling more safe. We became more forgiving on our criminal laws. Crime started increasing. The two parties couldn't agree on how to address it. And really what happened is the pastors from our inner cities are the ones that were seeing the damage that was being done to the minority men. And so they were the ones that stood up and said, we've got to stop this. And what happened? The result was We got Reagan and the war on drugs. You can see that that's all happened again. You could say that this backlash that we're currently having should have happened 2 years ago, but this whole perception versus reality argument, coupled with the abortion ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court, muted the backlash from taking place 2 years ago, and maybe even 4 years ago. But I think the Supreme Court ruling was probably less than 4 years ago. So I think that the backlash we're having now is going to be stronger than it would have been 2 years ago because we in the press to prevent stories about crime getting out and more getting out more. And as a result, I think you're going to see a bigger shift to the right for a period of time because they have masked the problem and they've coerced people to not talk about it and they've said you're lying and now that's all coming out. So the backlash is going to be bigger than it would have been.
But even the Democrats that have tried to take a common sense approach to crime and actually crack down on it in their cities, they've been painted as, well, they're just MAGA Democrats. They're just trying to follow Trump.
Well, and it's a bigger problem than you think on that. I mean, Texas is a really good example of the underlying issue because Texas is a center right state. It's probably more closer, it's probably more conservative than center right. So for you to run as a Democrat in the state of Texas, um, it's difficult. And the reason why is when the Democrats control Texas, they were conservative Democrats, and there's no longer room for that in the Democrat Party. So when they put up a candidate who would have a chance of winning, they can't raise the money by saying right of center issues. So they have to go and they have to commit to these far left positions. And you look at the last candidate for governor of Texas, the positions he took in the legislature, Allred, just disqualified him from being able to run statewide. But the reason why is he had to take those positions to be able to raise the money so that he could mount a statewide campaign. And then once he did that, he disqualified himself from being able to win a statewide campaign in Texas. A Democrat in a statewide election right now will lose by 13 points on average in Texas. And you're seeing that in other areas too. That's how the party kind of regulates these issues. If you want our money, these are the positions you're taking. And you see it really bad right now in the DA races where, we've got a Soros-backed group identifies and recruits soft on crime politicians, attorneys to run. Once they get elected, there's other groups that invite them to seminars saying quid pro quo. In my opinion, here are the positions you're going to take, and you're no longer going to prosecute these things. You're no longer going to do enhancements. So, a drug dealer in possession of 20 pounds of meth or fentanyl, you're only going to charge them with possession of drugs. So that's 2 weeks in jail versus 20 years, and it goes on and on and on. And then they have this third group that's releases pseudoscience reports saying when you enact these policies, they will not impact crime or public safety. And then they have this final group that gives them press releases that they release saying to sell all these things to the public. And how does the public say we're being manipulated? It's really difficult. And so we have to go back historically. The most accurate source on crime data has been law enforcement. Law enforcement's been belittled. It's been belittled dramatically for the last 4, 5, 6 years. And it's because it's for that purpose. The largest item of the county budget is law enforcement. So if they can decrease that, they can then move that money to their priorities, which are social issues. And that's what we've seen happen, I think, for the last few years.
So what is the actual data on the effectiveness of like harsher sentencing versus the so-called rehabilitation efforts?
Well, I think it's dramatic, and I think it's very clear what the difference is. And the problem is, number one, rehabilitative policies are really turning out to be a smokescreen for decriminalization. I mean, look, you've got examples all over the place where you go to a seminar about marijuana, then your charge is dismissed. And in some places, they don't even care whether you attended. They just say you're supposed to go. So I would question whether the rehabilitation programs are really intended for anything other than getting money to politicians. I think you've got to be really concerned about that. But I would also point to a specific situation that shows the difference in a stark manner, because in a lot of these places, these rehabilitative efforts that we're talking about are a message for you can't hold people accountable anymore. So there's a case that called Sanchez versus Alabama, where this county in the state of Alabama was sued by these activist groups, and they had to live under a preliminary injunction for both felonies and misdemeanors for 4 years, where they could not hold anybody. If they got arrested, you had to release them, and then if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, you couldn't arrest them and hold them again. If they failed to appear, you had to release them again, and right away, within a short period of time, crime started increasing. Well, the problem with the sheriff was a former Marine. He's like, this isn't right. I'm not settling. I'm not going to do this. This isn't good for public safety. So they lived under that for 4 years, and they went up to the United States Court of Appeals. I don't remember whether it was the eighth district. I think it was the 10th district, and it was reversed. And so they got to go back, re-implement accountability, consequences if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And what do you know? Within 6 months, crime started going down. So, I mean, I think that's the best example for we know what we have to do to fight crime, and it's accountability and consequences if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And everywhere we've seen the opposite crime, it's seen as a green light to commit more crime. So we know what to do. We're just having law enforcement or judges hands tied to prevent them from doing it. And we have to address that.
Well, I think the ultimate deterrent is always the death penalty for the most severe crimes. But, you're a lawyer, and I always hear this argument that, well, it costs more to put somebody on death row than just to serve a life sentence. Why is that? Why can't we just execute people who commit these heinous crimes?
Well, I mean, I would make two. I mean, I have a couple of arguments on that, but I agree with you that we have to have consequences, and the most substantial consequence is death. But I would say that our friends who have these policy agendas put up these roadblocks, so these procedural protections, and courts just give all these guarantees so that we make sure that the Constitution isn't violated. And I question whether a lot of those are not done with the intention of forcing reform. The best example I can give you is California. Everything that's being done in California, we don't hear this, but it's being done because their prison population is full. I mean, their capacity is more than full, and it's been capped by case law. And so they're refusing because they don't have the political will to build additional capacity. If they would build additional capacity, that would solve all their, I mean, probably 80, 90% of their problems. But they refuse to do that. And it's because by refusing to build additional capacity, it forces, either through case law or administrative action, reforms that they want. You can see the same thing happening in New York, where they want to close Rikers Island, and they're not going to replace it with that capacity. They're intentionally going to decrease capacity because that will force, in effect, the reforms that they want without saying it. And so, I think that the why can't we have the death penalty for more crimes? I think it's because of those types of things. The protections that are built into the system for that already make it a deterrent to the system to operate it because it's so expensive. And I think that's a creation of it's probably the compromise between the two groups, the left and the right, over having the death penalty. We're going to have these procedural protections, which then act as a deterrent to ever exercising it. And so we need to recognize that and then have what's the reality of that. We need to build force jurisdictions to build additional capacity if they won't do it, or we need to educate the public to say the reason why you have more crime is because your politicians won't build additional prison capacity.
Well, and it's also hard with, you have to consider the rights of a citizen, and I'm sure there are people, we know there's people that are imprisoned that are actually innocent, and they say there's so many people that have been put to death that have been innocent. I don't know what you think on that, but as far as
Well, I don't.
citizens,
I have a dim view of that. I think that's just a talking point from the other side. I mean, it's they always point to it, and I would say, is the system perfect? No. Um, but I think it's the best system in the world. I mean, we have countries in this world still to this day where if you're accused of a crime, you'll disappear and you'll never show up and you never get tried. I mean, we have all these protections in our system. And I would say once you're tried and you have gone through all the protections of the system, I think it is very unhealthy for our criminal justice system for people to still undermine it and say, um, you're innocent. You should have never gone to trial. We're delegitimizing the system. At some point, we have a history in our country where politicians refuse to talk about pending cases. That's not really true anymore. Or once the jury reached a verdict we all disagree with, the politicians would come out and say, we must rally behind the verdict because that's our system. We don't have that anymore either. So we're now in this period where anytime a judge rules against you, whether it's trial court or the U.S. Supreme Court, if they rule against your political position, then we delegitimize the court. It wasn't correct. They're just basing their decision on politics, and that's unhealthy for our government. It's unhealthy for society, but we don't have. I mean, we used to have gutters. I mean, governors, like we used to have on cars where you couldn't drive, you couldn't push your pedal past a certain point, so you couldn't go over a certain speed. We don't have that governor on our politics anymore. You've got terrible examples of Schumer standing in front of the Supreme Court, essentially threatening justices at the Supreme Court if they rule against his position. And then we've got an example where somebody tried to kill Kavanaugh and his family after that. And so I don't know what the answer for that is because I don't think that I mean, we've got one party that just that's the only thing they have left right now is threats. And to a certain extent, it's working. I mean, I read an article this week about Barrett at the Supreme Court and that she has a young family and that there were concerns that she was moderating her positions out of fear. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, but if that's true, that was what they intended and it's working. But that's because that's all they have left. They've lost, and they're continuing to lose support among the public. So it will continue to get worse. Whenever I heard in the election that Trump was a danger or a risk to democracy, I was like, no, he's not. He's a danger to Democrats. And if you just change that in your mind and look at all those comments, then you go, oh yeah, he's not a risk to democracy. He's a risk to the Democrat Party.
so it does kind of seem like they are reeling, but is these criminal justice reform advocates, do they still have a shot at getting a lot of their policies through, or do you think the public's kind of seen through it for the most part?
Well, I did I learned a week or so ago, I did a podcast where somebody was saying that, these Soros groups that are targeting DA's races, there's only one DA left in the state of California that was supported by Soros. So they're losing, but in other places, they're still winning. So in Harris County, the Democrat DA in last March lost because she was originally supported by Soros, and then she realized those things don't work, and so she said, no, I'm not going to do them anymore. And so they shunned her, didn't invite her to her seminars anymore, and then they ran somebody against her in the primary, and he won, and he ended up winning the election by like a point in November. But he's been very quiet. Uh, and so one of the consequences of the election is he may be moderating his positions because I think he should realize in Texas, even in Harris County, if he goes and does what they've asked him to do, he won't be a DA very long.
So, you you talk with a lot of different lawmakers.
Mhm.
Um, is there a lot of debates going on, different policies getting passed to reform criminal justice right now, or where are they at on that?
Well, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been debating reforms that um, weakened criminal justice and weakened the bail system. And so Texas, probably 4 years ago, went the opposite direction and strengthened the criminal justice system, and strengthened the bail system in Texas. And so, we now have good bail reform and bad bail reform going on in legislatures. Like New York passed really bad bail reform, and now they've gone through multiple rounds of rolling it back. They still have more to do. California has attempted to pass bad bail reform, and it's failed, either with the public not voting for it, or it just didn't go anywhere in the legislature. But then we've got counties that are trying to do it. So my thought is, any county that's a one-party county, on the left, is going to be susceptible to these crazy people coming in and pushing these bail reform measures. And the problem is, we've done it long enough that I think originally you could say, hey, their intent was to go to Democrat strongholds, elect their policies, show how great and successful they were, and then bring them out into conservative areas. But you could also say, no, they've been complete failures and they won't give up. They won't try anything new. They're just doubling down. And so you have to say they're punishing. I mean, because who gets injured by these terrible criminal justice reforms? It's the very minority communities that they say they're trying to help. Because when crime goes up, it affects them negatively more so and more quickly than other racial groups. And so I would say we're still fighting it. They're kind of going underground a little bit, and they're going to say that they're moderate. They're going to try to say that they're more moderate. But we've already seen that with Biden. I would just say, who do you believe? I mean, I've been saying the last election, I was saying we can go back to our identity politics after the next election or two. Let's vote on crime. Well, now they know that crime is an important issue and immigration was an important issue. And it's going to be very difficult for them to respond on immigration because how long did it take to close the border? 6 weeks? I mean, the borders crossings have gone down 90 something percent, and nobody is disputing that. They're not disputing the numbers. And the same thing can be on crime. If we had a national change in policy, I mean, the same thing would happen. So I think it's going to be very difficult for those policies to win again for a while. But the problem is we're going to have this whole period of time where they're going to say, I'm law and order, elect me. And once they get elected, they're going to go back and follow the money. So it's follow the money on who's supporting them, and just call them out. And if you have any questions, until they start moderating as a policy, I think it's going to take at least one more election because the National Party is doubling down on we just weren't liberal enough. In fact, Harris moderated her position 6 weeks before the election. If she'd have just stuck to her core, she would have won, which we know that's absolutely not true. And so I think we need them to elect a far left candidate, them stick to their guns, and then lose dramatically, and then they'll start to moderate. I don't think that'll happen until then.
What about like law enforcement policies? Like you hear about stop and frisk and some of these other things. Is that gonna be increasing?
Well, it should, because stop and frisk is a known law enforcement technique that works. And, contrary to what we hear in the press, it went up to the Court of Appeals and was upheld. So I would just say any policy, law enforcement policy or technique that works for the last 4 or 5 years has been attacked as racist and any other thing. I mean, I've done a debate where, they won't even admit a jail is a jail. They call it a cage. And so they use this toxic language, which is intended to cut off debate. And you just don't have any rights as a citizen anymore under their arguments for public safety. I mean, where was it? California has somewhere in the last week has proposed a law that you don't have a right to defend your home if somebody breaks into it. I mean, it's like, am I supposed to help them load up their car with everything in my house? Is that what you're requiring me to do? And I mean, it's almost like that's exactly what they're requiring because they're trying to cut off your ability to defend your property. Like in Texas, we have the castle doctrine. If you break into my house, I have the right to use lethal force. In California, in many other places, you only have the right to defend yourself. And if you defend yourself and kill them, you're going to have to show that you were under, lethal force yourself. So that's the only thing that justifies you using that. Where in this debate did we elevate the rights of the criminals or accused criminals over the rights of law-abiding citizens? That's out of touch. That's out of sync with our normal history, and we need to get back to that period of time. I mean, I think you made a point earlier that I just want to accentuate. We have this small group of people in each city that commits probably 60, 70% of the crime. And so we have this city within the city. And then outside that little city, we have this little buffer area between the law enforcement citizens and the criminals. And they're looking every day, which city am I going to be a part of? And if there's no consequences for crime, they're joining the criminal city. And if there are consequences for crime, then they're like, I'm going to follow the law because I don't want the consequences. And a lot of the policies that we are seeing right now in our urban areas are policies that are causing these people that live in the gray areas to pick to live with the crime city, and we got to change that. And as we go forward, as Trump addresses crime more so, and crime starts going down, except in the urban areas where we have the Democratic strongholds, where they're still using these pseudoscience policies that do not work, and they keep lying to their public, it's going to become more and more of a drastic comparison. And that's what is going to break the back of that party if they don't change. And right now, they're not on a trajectory to change. They're not on a trajectory to moderate. They are on this, Pied Piper playing the flute, and they're all following them right off the cliff.
Well, I guess that seems to be a positive thing for Republicans right now, that the public is mostly on our side in most of the country, and hopefully we can see a lot of positive change as the Trump administration goes forward and just all the conservatives.
Eventually the Democrats will moderate and become law enforcement again, like they have historically. And when that happens, then we'll go back to identity politics on other issues. Right now, we're just at the end of this period, and I would say in November it ended. But up until then, we were in this identity politics thing where it's like third world countries, where, if you believe this, then there is no way you can vote for Ken, period, because it's contrary to your identity. And even if you don't agree with 50% of the policies that your party was enacting, my identity meant you could not vote for me under any circumstances. And that was working for a long time. But I think that's destroyed. And we'll have to see if they can create a new coalition going forward.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting what the future holds. Before we close out, you want to just kind of refer everybody to, the Bail Post podcast and your guys' resources there?
Sure. If people want more information about our organization, you can go to pbtx.com, the Professional Bondsman of Texas. We have our website where we have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. And we also have our own podcast called The Bail Post. There's a link on our menu, or you can just go to www.thebailpost.com. We do 2 episodes a month where we talk about criminal justice issues. We're in the middle of a legislative session, so we just did a post about the major bail bond bills pending in Texas.
Well, awesome. We'll be sure to link that all in the description for everybody, and appreciate your time today, Ken. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.